for. This is my last hurrah. Once I start, I ain't gon' stop till I go too far. Last hurrah, and it's okay. Maybe tomorrow I won't feel this pain. Last hurrah.
2019 AD, the past year. 2019 was a magical year of multitudinous phenomenons. Rolling over from the previous year, a government shutdown endured.
This is him quoting you. I just want to check that the shutdown could go on for months or even a year or longer. Did you say that? And
I did.
I
did.
Is that your assessment of where we are?
That. Absolutely, I said that. I don't think it will, but I am prepared, and I think I can speak for Republicans in the House and Republicans in the Senate. They feel very strongly about having a safe country, having a border that makes sense. Without borders, I've said it many times, we don't have a country.
But eventually, it reopened.
This morning, the government is open for business for now. President Trump feeling the heat after conceding to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi in a shutdown showdown over his border wall. And with just 3 weeks to make a deal, the president is striking a skeptical note, telling the Wall Street Journal overnight he personally thinks it's, quote, less than 50-50 that a bipartisan negotiating team can hash it out. Mr. Trump vowing he will still build his wall, even if he has to go around Congress and declare a national emergency.
But another government crisis was growing in South America.
So who is Venezuela's leader? Is it Nicolás Maduro, the man who's ruled since the death of Hugo Chavez 6 years ago? Or is it the opposition leader, Juan Guaidó, who declared himself caretaker president and swore to end what he calls a dictatorship? The United States and Canada were quick to back Mr. Guaidó, along with Brazil, Argentina, and Colombia. It all comes as Venezuela's long political and economic crisis grinds on. The economy is in freefall. In recent years, millions of Venezuelans have given up hope and left the country. With huge crowds on the streets of Caracas, this all feels like the most serious threat Mr. Maduro has ever faced.
A few weeks later, back in Washington, a bunch of Catholic high school kids were confronted by a weirdo with a drum. However, a web of lies were spun, painting the kids as neo-Nazi aggressors.
We are hearing from a Native American elder and Vietnam War veteran speaking to CNN after a disturbing viral video shows a group of teens harassing and mocking him in the nation's capital. Here's the video sparking outrage on social media right now. Nathan Phillips was beating his drum and singing an American Indian protest song. And this was on Friday on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when he saw a clash erupting between a group of teenage students and 4 African-American young men preaching about the Bible and oppression. Well, Phillips says he immediately sensed danger. Then Phillips describes the tense moments now being replayed over and over again online when a young man got right in his face.
But soon, the truth came out, and the kids did nothing wrong.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. If you were on social media over the weekend, you probably saw this video. It was shot Friday afternoon on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. It seemed to show a group of teenage boys taunting an elderly American Indian man who was holding a drum. The young men had come to Washington from a Catholic school in Kentucky to demonstrate in the March for Life. Some of them wore Make America Great Again hats. They seemed menacing. Within hours, the video is being replayed by virtually every news outlet in America. But did the video really describe what happened? That should have been the first question that journalists ask. Checking facts and adding context is what journalists are paid to do. It's in the first line of the job description. And yet, amazingly, almost nobody in the American media did that. And that's a shame because there was a lot to check. The full video of what happened on Friday in Washington is well over an hour long. The 4 minutes that made Twitter don't tell the story, but instead distort the story. A longer look shows that the boys from Covington Catholic in Kentucky were not a roving mob looking for a fight. They were, in fact, and it shows it on the tape, standing in place waiting to be picked up by a bus. As they waited there, members of a group called the Black Hebrew Israelites, that's a black supremacist organization, began taunting them with racial epithets. And then Nathan Phillips, the now famous American Indian activist, approached them, pounding on his drum. Now, the footage seems to suggest that the boys were unsure of whether Phillips was hostile or taking their side against the Black Hebrew Israelites. But in any case, there is no evidence at all that anybody said, build a wall.
Around the same time, two titans of internet blood sports were set to clash.
Now, Tara, a sometimes guest on the Morning Kumite, had heard that Tonka and Andy were having an argument. Tonka had said that he could set up a fight, that he could arrange the details of it, but he was running into some difficulties. And out of nowhere, Tara said, she'll have it set up in 5 minutes. And she wasn't kidding. Tara contacted Tim Loy of Valor Fighting Challenge, and within 24 hours, a date had been set in stone. On January the 19th of 2019, Andy Worski and Tonkasaw would meet each other inside the cage in Knoxville, Tennessee.
But the internet's biggest tough guy.
I don't want the money. I want to bludgeon Andy Worski and get away with it. I'm being told that all I have to do is show up on a certain day at a certain time, and I'm going to be locked inside of a cage with somebody who has a horrible ass whipping coming, and I get to do whatever I want to this man without legal consequence. It's going to be great. I don't want the money. I want to cause lots and lots of bodily harm to somebody who has it coming. I'm beating the fuck out of this piece of shit. Going to do my damnedest to end him right there in the fucking cage, and if the ref doesn't stop me, then guess what the fuck's gonna happen?
Chickened out.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we're gonna bring out an opponent who his opponent did not show up. So I'd like to welcome to the cage, Andy Worski.
To elaborate on what Shamir had been saying, Andy Worski is making his way to the cage. His opponent, Tonkasaw, did not show up. Apparently, two internet personalities making a name in the show.
Well, he does have a belt, though. Well, I wonder what it's for.
Making the most of the experience with the no-show, Andy Worski here.
This guy, Tonkasaw, has challenged about 50 people online to fight. It's saying he was a UFC champ, MMA, and I was the first person to be like, all right, yeah, I'll do it. And he's tried everything in his power to make this match not happen. And I called the bluff, one after another. And you know what, I want to say that I'm not a fighter, but after training for the past 3 months, almost every single day, I respect the fight game. I respect the fighters. I respect the people who come out of here and even get their ass kicked, because I was willing to come out here and get my ass kicked, Tonka. Where you at? I flew from Canada. He lives in Alabama, one state away. Low T Tonka. Where are you?
A few weeks later in February, a former Yugoslav country renames itself in a questionable referendum.
It's been a busy time for Stole Naumov. As the host of a popular phone-in program across Macedonia, one topic has been dominating the airwaves in recent weeks. The name of the country is changing to the Republic of North Macedonia. It's just one word, but to many of his callers, it means a great deal.
The main concern is that we will lose our identity. There should be more efforts to explain to people that nobody can take away what you have. You are what you are. Being Macedonian, nobody can take that away from us.
The name change brings to an end a 27-year dispute with Greece that dates back to the breakup of Yugoslavia. It was then Macedonia declared independence. Greece fiercely objected, believing that the use of the same name as their region of Macedonia amounted to a theft of history and cultural heritage. The agreement with Greece to change the name was first announced in June of last year between the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras and his Macedonian counterpart Zoran Zaev. It means that North Macedonia, which nearly descended into civil war in 2001, is now free to join NATO, the flag of which was raised in Skopje this week. The future also includes a move towards membership of the European Union. And while the diplomacy has established what could be a brighter future, the busiest people are those who are replacing road signs and street names across the country. A process that could take a long time.
Later that month, another summit was held between two sworn enemies.
President Trump and Chairman Kim Jong-un meet again. The cameras capturing the stage set in Vietnam with the possibility to build on their historic first meeting in Singapore.
I thought the first summit was a great success, and I think this one hopefully will be equal or greater than the first. And we made a lot of progress, and I think the biggest progress was our relationship is really a good one.
The North Korean leader tracking the time since they last met. He notes 261 days have passed and says this second meeting gives hope for success with time, adding he will really try to make that happen. The definition of success for Mr. Kim remains unclear. For President Trump, it would mean a North Korea free of nuclear weapons. He believes it could bring a bright future for the dictator.
At the end of the month, America's favorite conspiracy theorist returned to YouTube after the ban hammer was dropped.
And it's unbelievable because, I mean, they 100% in San Francisco is the main project site, literally have an alien base, and they are literally communicating, and they've got like astronaut level people taking super hardcore levels of drugs and going into meetings with these things and making intergalactic deals. Again, that's what the government believes and says they're doing.
When you say the government, that's a broad stroke. You're painting you're using a broad brush. Like, what do you mean by the government?
Breakaway rogue intelligence agencies.
Okay, so what you're saying is essentially that they're using psychedelic drugs to communicate with interdimensional beings. All right.
Yeah, spirit guides.
Okay.
He then admitted everything.
Look, here's the thing.
Fine. Listen,
I'm going to be honest with you. I'm kind of retarded. In that... No.
That's going to be a soundbite.
In March, an IRL edgelord committed a mass shooting in New Zealand against Muslims.
Over in New Zealand, deadly acts of terror took lives at two mosques. 49 people were killed as gunmen opened fire on Friday prayers, forcing the city of Christchurch into lockdown. Kim Hye-sung has the latest.
49 people were killed and more than 20 wounded in shootings at two mosques on the southern island of New Zealand on Friday. New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern called the shootings a terrorist attack and said the country had been placed on its highest security threat level.
This is one of New Zealand's darkest days. Clearly, what has happened here is an extraordinary and unprecedented act of violence.
The shootings occurred in two locations, two mosques in Christchurch, one at El Noor Mosque and one at Linwood Mosque.
In the aftermath, Big Tech went even further in cracking down on edgy material.
All right, everyone. The other day, Trump declined to sign on U.S. support for the Christchurch call to action, which on its face, like with all newspeaky, pro-censorship, pro-police state sort of bullshit, it got a nice little ribbon attached to it. Basically, it's like taking a turd and putting it in a nice box. They've done this before, the Patriot Act, think of the kids. No, fucking pretty much every piece of shitty legislation, every shitty censorious deal, every bill, every proposal that's ever made is always couched in some permutation of think of the children, it's good for the planet, hugs and kisses, love beads, meditations, fucking bullshit. And that's basically what the Christchurch call to action is. Now, on its face, what it's presented as is, oh, well, there's extremism on the internet and we need to combat it. Okay, all well and good. The problem is if you look at what it's actually proposing, if you look at what proponents of it actually want to do, what it really means is censorship, both by states and by corporate entities. Yeah, wonderful, very family-friendly. Not dystopian at all. Totally not 1984 bullshit. Deplatforming of people with mundane political opinions who are not by any means extremists. Censorship of ideas even where there's no action involved or any intent of action. And that's basically the problem. The problem has never been any good faith attempt to try to, knock down actual extremists. And by extremists, I constrain that definition to mean specifically people who are fomenting or encouraging actual real-world violence or criminal activity.
Even one of my favorite channels got purged in the aftermath. Meanwhile, in Borat's country, its first post-independence president finally stepped down.
Kazakh President Nursultan Nazarbayev has resigned after 29 years in office as the first and only president of the country. He made the announcement in a televised address just weeks after dismissed the government, accusing it of failing to improve the economy. But the 78-year-old plans to continue to set government policy using his constitutional status as a leader of the nation.
A few days later, the last tiny strip of land controlled by the so-called Caliphate was liberated.
Trapped between the banks of the River Euphrates and the rubble of Baghouz, this wasteland of destruction, stormed on Saturday by the SDF, indeed marks the end of a 5-year-long chapter of war. The place for Islamic State's huge territorial expanse, which at its peak had been the size of England and governed the lives of some 7 million people, had been reduced to a fortified campsite just a few hundred meters long and 100 deep, defended by several hundred men and women determined to die fighting or blow themselves up rather than face capture. The Western-backed SDF announced the end of that campaign to destroy ISIS along the mid-Euphrates Valley on March the 23rd. They flew their flag high over Baghouz in celebration. The campaign to annihilate this final slither of the Caliphate had lasted over 7 months in duration, costing hundreds of lives.
April would be a month of regime change. Starting on the 2nd, a president who had been in power for 2 decades finally resigned.
And more news now from around the world. Algeria's ailing leader Abdelaziz Bouteflika submitted his resignation with immediate effect after weeks of mass protests. The resignation came hours after the military demanded impeachment proceedings be launched against Bouteflika immediately, as it dismissed the announcement he would resign before his mandate expires. He's been in power for 20 long years and had already dropped plans to seek a 5th term as the opposition to his rule grew. The ailing leader suffered a stroke 6 years ago and has rarely appeared in public since then.
A little over a week later, the first image of a black hole was released.
This is the first ever image of a black hole, released by the Event Horizon Telescope collaboration on April 10th, 2019. It shows plasma orbiting the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy M87. The bright region shows where plasma is coming towards us, and since it's traveling near the speed of light, it appears brighter when coming towards us and dimmer when going away. This is called relativistic beaming. From the images, scientists can tell that the plasma is orbiting clockwise. It takes around 2 days for the plasma to complete one orbit. Here, we are looking at the black hole using electromagnetic waves with a wavelength of 1.3 millimeters, radio waves.
And then memed. The next day, the world's most important publisher and whistleblower of our time was finally arrested after 7 years of asylum.
British police have arrested the founder of the WikiLeaks website, Julian Assange, and removed him from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The Metropolitan Police say they were invited into the embassy after its government withdrew his asylum status. He's now thought to be en route to a central London police station. He's lived at the embassy since 2012.
Julian Assange shot to fame with a massive spill of American state secrets. But it was then his personal life that put him at the centre of an international drama that's run for years.
See all those people standing down there?
This shocking footage first brought WikiLeaks to international attention.
That's a weapon. Come on, fire!
It shows the killing of a group of Iraqis, including 2 journalists, by a helicopter gunship. A flood of secret documents on the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan followed, and then classified diplomatic cables. To his admirers, he became a champion of free speech and transparency. In the US, he is seen as a threat to national security.
On the same day, Another longtime strongman of an Arab state was deposed from power.
وعليه أعلن أنا وزير الدفاع رئيس اللجنة الأمنية العليا اقتلاع ذلك النظام والتحفظ على رأسه بعد اعتقاله في مكان آمن. كما أعلن الآتي: أولاً، تشكيل مجلس عسكري انتقالي يتولى إدارة الحكم لفترة انتقالية مدتها عامين.
A few days later, one of Paris's most historic and beautiful chapels is set partially ablaze. And finally, a 3-year-old nothing burger was revealed for what it was. A nothing burger.
So after 2 long years, here we are. It's hard to believe that any of it actually happened looking back. It was 2 years of unremitting, never diminishing hysteria about Russia. It was a continuous wave of panic and superstition over unseen Slavic interference, all stoked by the very people we're told are the most rational in our society. For 2 years, our capital city became a kind of massive CNN panel, a living monument to ignorance and dishonesty, where the loudest and the dumbest invariably got the most attention. We just lived through 2 full years of that. Screaming, threatening, surveillance, character assassination, loyalty tests, wild allegations of treason and spying and betrayal from office holders. Innocent people found themselves afraid to go to dinner, scared to send text messages or talk on the phone. For 2 years, we lived in an all-pervasive cult of personality. Our leaders worshipped a 74-year-old federal prosecutor who almost never spoke in public. He alone was good, they told us. Only they could interpret his will. It was all thoroughly bizarre. Demented, really, though nobody said so at the time. They were too afraid. It seems like a dream now, which actually it was. None of it was real. Nobody colluded with Vladimir Putin. Nobody changed vote totals or met secretly in Prague or had a P-tape, whatever that is. There was never a Russia conspiracy. Hillary Clinton wasn't robbed of her rightful position by Julian Assange or Roger Stone or anyone else. Hillary lost the election because she was an entitled boor who didn't run on anything. In the end, that's what Robert Mueller proved. The news anchors couldn't handle that. They couldn't handle that conclusion. It was too far from what they'd promised their audiences for so long. They were too invested in the lies. When the report arrived in Congress this morning, they found themselves reduced to huffing and sputtering. They couldn't admit what was in the report. Well, they told us, Robert Mueller didn't exonerate President Trump. Okay. I mean, that may be true, but only theologically. Mueller doesn't have the power to absolve sin, only God can. But in every other sense, Mueller's report was exculpatory. If dozens of federal prosecutors spent 2 years trying to charge you with the crime and then found they couldn't, it would mean there wasn't any real evidence you did it. And that's what happened here.
On the last day of the month, a Japanese emperor abdicated.
今日をもち、天皇としての務めを終えることになりました。ただいま国民を代表して安倍内閣総理大臣の述べられた言葉に深く謝意を表します。即位から30年、これまでの天皇としての務めを国民への深い信頼と敬愛を持って行えたことは幸せなことでした。象徴としての私を受け入れ、支えてくれた国民に心から感謝します。
In May, an Ebola outbreak became an international cause for concern.
The region has been grappling with attacks, misinformation, and lack of fund have been an impediment to control the outbreak mostly exhibited in the northeastern of DRC. The organization is denoting that the reason why the disease cannot be contained in DRC is because also new challenges are arising in the region. The countries in the crossfire of the disease is Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan. The response team is unable to deliver amicable treatments in the region due to largely insecurity. This month, the medical team has faced a setback because there was a gunfight witnessed in the city of Butembo, where at least 50 armed militia were engaged with security forces. Jessica Lunga, spokeswoman for the DRC's health ministry, noted that people have gone into hiding and Operation Contact Tracing and vaccination are giving the virus an opportune time to spread within the community.
On the same day, clashes broke out in the Holy Land.
Israel's army says it's hit some 200 Palestinian targets. It says the strikes are in response to hours of Palestinian rocket fire. One strike hit a 6-story building that Turkey says housed its state-run Anadolu news agency. Ankara has condemned the Israeli strikes and called on the international community to take action to ease tensions. Gazan authorities say dozens of people were wounded and several killed in the bombings, amongst them a mother and baby. Israel blames Hamas for their deaths. Israel says over 400 rockets have been fired from Gaza into southern Israel since Saturday. Some rockets struck homes, like here in Kiryat Gat. Israeli authorities say one woman was seriously wounded here. Dozens of Palestinian rockets were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. As the violence escalated, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convened a security meeting.
Around the same time, a major offensive was underway in another part of the Middle East.
By May the 8th, the Syrian Arab Army SAA and its allies had repelled a series of counterattacks by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham-led forces, keeping control of all the positions captured in northwestern Hama. Especially intense clashes took place near Tel Otmar, where, according to pro-government sources, the SAA had eliminated at least 5 militants. Despite this, the SAA has not been able to develop on its success and push further into the militant-held area. An initial attempt to advance in the direction of Kafr Nabuda was repelled by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and its radical counterparts. On the morning of May the 8th, the SAA advanced on Kafr Nabuda and entered the village. Clashes are ongoing.
A week later, something happened in one of the Middle East's most important waterways.
The 2 tankers that came under attack in the Gulf of Oman were the Norwegian-owned but Marshall Island-flagged Front Altair and the Japanese-owned but Panama-flagged Kokuka Courageous. Now, US naval forces in the region said that they received 2 separate distress calls, one at 12 minutes past 6 in the morning, that's local time, and another at 7 a.m., so shortly afterwards. The US Navy guided missile destroyer, the USS Bainbridge, responded to those calls. Now, the US Navy presence in the region is aimed primarily at warding off any Iranian closure of the Strait of Hormuz, a key maritime choke point.
Meanwhile, in Europe, the Union of Europe's parliamentary elections were held.
They'd gathered from early evening in the square outside the European Parliament. Almost all of them here pro-EU, but was it to be their night? Inside the chamber, the dust settled quickly as projections came in. Fragmentation was the word of the night. The dominance of the big centre-left and centre-right groupings hit hard.
Exit polls and estimates.
Not though by the pan-continental nationalist Eurosceptic surge some had predicted, but in large part by liberal pro-Europe parties.
For the first time in 40 years,
Since the first elections in 1979 of the European Parliament, the two classical parties, Socialists and Conservatives, will no longer have a majority.
In the UK, one e-celeb tried to run for the United Kingdom Independence Party.
My name is Carl Benjamin. I'm a member of the United Kingdom Independence Party, and I'm campaigning to be an MEP for the southwest of England. I'm a centrist liberal, and I voted and campaigned for Brexit, so as you might imagine, I do not actually want to become an MEP. I want to see Britain out of the European Union. However, it seems that the political class of Britain is guilty of dereliction of duty and will not deliver Britain's exit from the EU, and so now regular people like myself have to start getting our hands dirty with the political process.
It didn't take long for his old, off-color tweets to blow up in his face.
I'd like to ask Carl Benjamin,
go ahead.
Why do you think it is unacceptable to say on Twitter that you wouldn't keep the rape of female leaders?
Because I don't think women are any different to men in the way we should treat them. Unlike the establishment, unlike our judges who literally say if you were a man, I would send you to jail, I think we should treat women the same as men. And that means if a woman is being a giant bitch and laughing at male suicide, I'm going to be a giant dick back to her. Any question?
The controversy would not go away.
I want to ask you, why did you decide to choose rape when talking about Jess Phillips?
I'm interested in why you're deliberately misrepresenting what's happened. Have you seen the video in question?
Of course, yes.
Right, and how would you describe that video?
Why did you decide to choose rape?
It's very important because you've been lying about me and I've been attacked in the street because of your lies. So this is genuinely important.
I've never lied about you, and you're here today.
A lie by omission is still a lie, and in your last segment about me with Jess Phillips, you did not mention that this was a comedy video.
Talk us through that thought process. Why rape?
It's a joke at your expense.
You could have chosen a number of things.
I did. And if you could describe the video, it was a 4-minute blooper reel video of comedy.
A feminist approach, but you chose rape, and I'm really interested to find out why.
And finally, the party tanked. In the aftermath, the Brexit party reigned supreme.
Mr. Returning Officer, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Never before in British politics has a new party launched just 6 weeks ago topped the polls in a national election. The reason, of course, is very obvious. We voted to leave in a referendum. We were supposed to do so on March the 29th, and we haven't. There's a huge message here, massive message here. The Labour and Conservative parties could learn a big lesson from tonight, though I don't suppose that they actually will. The new date is the 31st of October. We in the Brexit Party have got men and women of considerable business experience. We want to be part of that negotiating team. We want to take responsibility for what's happening, and we're ready to do so. I hope the government is listening.
Also in the aftermath, the Prime Minister resigned due to her ineptitude over the United Kingdom's secession from the European Union.
Back in 2016, we gave the British people a choice. Against all predictions, the British people voted to leave the European Union. I feel as certain today as I did 3 years ago that in a democracy, if you give people a choice, you have a duty to implement what they decide. I have done my best to do that. I negotiated the terms of our exit and a new relationship with our closest neighbours that protects jobs, our security, and our union. I have done everything I can to convince MPs to back that deal. Sadly, I have not been able to do so. I tried 3 times, but it is now clear to me that it is in the best interests of the country for a new Prime Minister to lead that effort. So I am today announcing that I will resign as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party on Friday the 7th of June, so that a successor can be chosen. I've agreed with the party chairman and with the chairman of the 1922 committee that the process for electing a new leader should begin in the following week.
At the year's halfway point, a petty, gay Latino journalist for Vox cynically ushered in yet another adpocalypse to take down a conservative podcaster.
This is a video to signal boost on what can only be taken as traditional media declaring war on independent creators on YouTube, and YouTube itself once again bowing to the pressures of the emotionally infantile authoritarian left Carlos Maza and the multi-billion-dollar media hub Vox Media. It is the duty of all YouTubers to speak up and speak out over what has been happening over the course of the past few days, because this affects all of us, and regardless of whether you like or hate the content creators currently being affected by this, we must all band together under the threat of a common enemy, Vox News and the traditional media that have declared war on content creators. First, we have Carlos Maza, the lobotomized Latino at Vox News, who produces what can loosely be considered news commentary, and from the few videos of his that I've watched, rarely troubles himself with a heady burden of such mundane trivialities like factual information. As a result of the extreme factual inaccuracies, Steven Crowder, who runs a conservative comedic channel on YouTube, has produced a great many videos that serve to both mock Maza, who I've referred to on Twitter merely as Voxboy, and to also provide easily Googled factual information that rebutted Voxboy's content. This is a pattern that has apparently gone on for quite some time. As a result of the ad hominem mocking done by Crowder, Voxboy decided that Gay Pride Month was the perfect time to do what the authoritarians on the left are so good at doing: whine, bitch, and moan until they manage to deplatform whomever is hurting their feelings.
Meanwhile, blood would be spilled in Sudan.
A raid at dawn, where the protesters least expected it. Sudan's Rapid Support Forces and the police moved in. Shots were fired as unarmed protesters dived for cover. For more than 2 months, they had protected their sit-in outside the army headquarters, the symbol of their defiance and their revolution. But for Sudan's military junta, it represented a threat.
As the African Union suspended Sudanese membership over the bloodbath, women took over in Finland.
Helsinki, Finland's new center-left coalition government has been sworn in, with the country's first social democratic prime minister in 16 years assuming office, along with the climate issue focused cabinet where women are in the majority. The 19-member cabinet of Prime Minister Antti Rinne, a former finance minister and trade union leader, was approved Thursday in the 200-seat Eduskunta legislature, after which President Sauli Niinisto appointed it. 11 of the cabinet members are female, reflecting Nordic gender equality in the nation's politics.
In the Persian Gulf, another incident occurred.
The United Arab Emirates says that 4 commercial vessels were hit by, quote, sabotage attacks near the port city of Fujairah, that's off its eastern coast. The Saudi energy minister said 2 of the kingdom's oil tankers were among the targets. Now, the alleged incidents come amidst rising tensions between Iran and the U.S. Tehran has called for a probe into who's responsible for the alleged assaults.
5 days later, an American drone was shot down by the Islamic Republic.
Tensions between the U.S. and Iran are running even higher tonight after the Iranians shot down a U.S. drone. President Trump called it a very big mistake, but he also appeared to play down the incident. Foreign Affairs correspondent Nick Schifrin begins our coverage.
Today in Tehran, speaking to a stadium of supporters, the commander-in-chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps delivered a threat as state TV released video of what it said was the launch of a missile and strike of a U.S. drone.
The downing of the American drone was a clear and precise message to America. And the message is this: an enemy that violates our borders will not return and will be destroyed.
Today at the Pentagon, a spokesman introduced the head of U.S. Air Forces in the Middle East who, by phone, delivered a counter.
This was an unprovoked attack on a U.S. surveillance asset that had not violated Iranian airspace at any time during its mission.
Both sides agree Iran shot down an RQ-4A drone whose wingspan is wider than a 737's. The U.S. military says this video shows the drone's smoke trail. The he said is over the drone's location. The U.S. military released this Google map showing what it said was the SAM, or surface-to-air missile launch site, and UAV, or drone location, over international waters. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif tweeted what appeared to be a hand-drawn map and said the drone violated Iranian airspace and was shot down in Iranian territorial waters.
I think probably Iran made a mistake.
At the White House, during a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, President Trump left open the possibility the strike was not ordered by Iran's senior leadership.
I find it hard to believe it was intentional, if you want to know the truth. I think that it could have been somebody who was loose and stupid.
On the same day, two communist leaders had a friendly meeting.
Chinese President Xi Jinping has met North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in Pyongyang. He's on a two-day state visit to North Korea. It is the first by a Chinese president in 14 years. Mr. Xi's entourage includes his wife, as well as Foreign Minister Wang Yi. They've been given a grand welcome, including a 21-gun salute. On the agenda, the stalled talks with the U.S. over North Korea's nuclear program, as well as economic issues. China is North Korea's only major ally, and Kim Jong-un has already visited China 4 times since March last year.
习近平和夫人彭丽媛在金正恩和夫人李学主陪同下，来到体育场主席台。在场观众全体起立，以热烈的掌声和欢呼声欢迎中国贵宾的到来。 演出在绚丽的焰火中拉开序幕，朝鲜文化相致欢迎词。
10 days later, history would be made at the DMZ.
Tweeting on his way out, quote, leaving South Korea after a wonderful meeting with Kim Jong-un, stood on the soil of North Korea, an important statement for all and a great honor. It really was amazing to watch it play out. Such a historic event. The demilitarized zone is about 160 miles long and 2.5 miles wide, but at what's called the Joint Security Area there, it comes down to a strip of stone about 16 inches wide. President Trump walked right up to that strip of stone on the south side with Kim on the north side. The president looked at Kim and said, "Should I step over?" Kim invited him over. Here's how the president described it later on. Listen here.
We went and met at the line, and in meeting at the line, I said, "Would you like me to come across?" He said, "I would be so honored." And that's the way it worked out. I didn't know really what he was going to say, but it was my honor to do it.
Blood and bombs would start off the month of July.
Dozens of bodies are hauled out of a migrant detention centre in the suburbs of Tripoli. It's the most reported casualties in a strike since forces loyal to Khalifa Haftar launched an offensive on the capital 3 months ago. On Monday, Haftar's Libyan National Army, the LNA, warned it would begin heavy airstrikes.
The Air Force aims to destroy the combat capability of terrorist groups through multiple and consecutive airstrikes, day and night. So we're warning citizens to take care and to pay attention.
The internationally recognised government in Tripoli has blamed Haftar for the airstrike, calling him a war criminal.
10 days later, a hurricane would smash the Gulf of Mexico.
The Gulf Coast underwater. Tropical Storm Barry crawling north through the state of Louisiana right now, bringing torrential rain and the potential for life-threatening flash flooding.
This is not your usual hurricane story. You're looking at video here from an area near where the eye of the storm came ashore as a Category 1 hurricane. However, the main danger right now is not from high winds, but instead, as Whit was alluding to, from all that rain. There is up to a foot more to come here as locals brace for those dangerous floods.
Overnight rescues underway. Crews in this helicopter airlifting 12 people and 2 pets. We have team coverage this morning.
A few days later, a notorious Mexican mobster gets the sentence he deserves.
Joaquin El Chapo Guzman's final day in court ended the way everyone expected, with the Sinaloa cartel leader sentenced to life in prison, plus an extra 30 years for good measure. But the hearing itself was dramatic. It was probably El Chapo's final time in public, and he used the occasion to speak his mind. Since his extradition, Chapo has been held in a high-security jail in Manhattan. But where he goes next is up to the Bureau of Prisons. His likely destination is ADX Florence, the so-called Alcatraz of the Rockies in Colorado. Chapo escaped twice from prison in Mexico, most recently by riding a motorcycle through a tunnel into his cell. But he'll have a tougher time breaking out of ADX. It's the most secure prison in the United States, with space for just under 500 inmates. Some of them are even more famous than El Chapo, like the Unabomber, a 9/11 plotter, the Boston Marathon bomber, and a Russian spy. Every person at ADX is kept in solitary confinement. A former warden said Chapo could end up in a special area of the prison called Range 13, where he'd spend the rest of his days in a 7 by 12-foot cell for 23 hours a day. Chapo is also under special restrictions called...
A week later, the United Kingdom would elect a new Prime Minister.
I have just been to see Her Majesty the Queen, who has invited me to form a government, and I have accepted. I pay tribute to the fortitude and patience of my predecessor and her deep sense of public service. But in spite of all her efforts, it has become clear that there are pessimists at home and abroad who think, after 3 years of indecision, that this country has become a prisoner to the old arguments of 2016. And in this home of democracy, we are incapable of honouring a democratic mandate. And so I am standing before you today to tell you, the British people, that those critics are wrong. The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy. And we're going to fulfill the repeated promises of Parliament to the people and come out of the EU on October the 31st, no ifs or buts. And we will do a new deal, a better deal, that will maximise the opportunities of Brexit while allowing us to develop a new and exciting partnership with the rest of Europe, based on free trade and mutual support.
But into August, the month would also begin with death, starting with a double mass shooting in the United States, first in El Paso.
We begin tonight with the deadly chaos in El Paso, the mass shooting at a Walmart shopping center. Law enforcement officials telling ABC News at least 20 people have been shot and killed, dozens more injured. As you can imagine, panic breaking out as the killing spree started. The suspected gunman, identified as 21-year-old Patrick Crusius of Allen, Texas, is in custody tonight. Terrified shoppers with their hands up, you see it right there. Police say 1,000 to 3,000 people were likely inside of the Walmart at the time of the shooting. Many of them families there buying back-to-school supplies. And now the high number of fatalities landing this horrific attack on the list of the 10 worst mass shootings in U.S. history.
And then, the city where the accords that ended the Bosnian War were drafted.
We're following breaking news on a second mass shooting in less than 24 hours. This latest one happened in Dayton, Ohio.
At least 9 people are dead and 16 injured after a gunman opened fire in a busy nightlife district just after 1 in the morning.
Now, that shooter was killed by police. Ken Bufa joins us from the newsroom with the latest. Ken?
And Gus, 9 people are dead and 16 others are injured after police say a gunman wearing body armor opened fire outside of a bar in Dayton, Ohio. Now, officers say around 1 a.m. the armored gunman began shooting a high-capacity rifle near the Ned Peppers bar on East 5th Street. Witnesses say they saw people waiting online to get into the bar being shot and falling to the ground. Authorities say police responded in less than 1 minute because this all unfolded in the Oregon Historic District, an area usually brimming with nightlife. Police say when they arrived, they found the gunman shot.
On the next day, India ended the special status to its most disputed territory.
2 South Asian nuclear powers locking horns once again in a 70-year-old conflict. India's revoked the special status of the autonomous region of Kashmir. Kashmiris now fear that it could lead to a transformation from majority Muslim to majority Hindu. Previously, the region was exempt from the Indian constitution and non-Kashmir residents were banned from buying property there. But it's changed now, and the moves really stoked tensions in what was already a hugely volatile area. As for Pakistan, which also has claims on Kashmir, there have been protests over the decision, with the country's foreign ministry calling the move illegal and a violation of a UN resolution. Authorities have put the region on lockdown, blocking internet connection and landline phones.
On the same day, protests in Hong Kong were reaching a critical mass. Even the airport was shut down.
Hong Kong International Airport has cancelled all remaining flights for a second day in a row after anti-government protesters converged on terminals, with some deliberately blocking access to the departure gates. Let's show you the scene there live at the moment. Right now you can see the protesters there. There is a noisy hubbub in the airport if we listen in. Quite chaotic there. There has been chanting, the protesters holding up signs, reminding you, of course, that this is an airport that is one of the busiest in the world, certainly one of Asia's busiest. Flights in and out were cancelled on Monday after thousands of demonstrations held a sit-in. There is quite a lot of disruption at the airport at the moment. Flights have been cancelled. We've been hearing from Hong Kong's leader, Carrie Lam. She has said violence is pushing the city into an abyss and a path of no return.
But the biggest event of August was the mysterious death of a sex trafficking billionaire with powerful friends.
Some breaking news right now. Disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein has taken his own life while he was behind bars here in New York City. Epstein was facing sex trafficking charges. NBC News investigative correspondent Tom Winter now has the very latest. Tom, what more do we know?
Peter, what we know now is that at 6:39 this morning, the fire department and EMS here in New York City got a phone call from MCC, which is a federal detention facility here in Manhattan in New York City, where Jeffrey Epstein was being held awaiting trial. They took him to New York's downtown hospital. He was in cardiac arrest, and he was pronounced there. What we know from officials that have been briefed on what happened, he was found, it appeared that he had hung himself in his cell.
Although ruled a suicide, the internet had its doubts.
All right, everyone, the time to mince words has ended with regards to the Epstein case. It's fairly clear that a murder happened and that this wasn't a suicide. For instance, what do we know? The official storyline is this. This is the official story. This isn't even an exaggerated version. The official story is that Epstein's lawyers told the prison, take him off suicide watch. You know, he had supposedly tried to kill himself before. He apparently was claiming he was attacked, which is probably true. They probably tried to kill him before. Probably what happened is they attacked him to try to silence him. It looked like he was going to crack anyway, so they decided to off him, somebody. I'll get into speculation on that separately here in a moment. So he gets taken off suicide watch. You know, he convinces his lawyers, hey, I'm not a suicide risk. Yeah, fucking send the guards away. The two guards that were watching him, one wasn't even a full-fledged guard. The other one was like new on the job. They were sent away, and for 5 nights were pulling like graveyard double shift. So, you know, they were practically high and hallucinating anyway. The camera malfunctioned during this particular 24-hour period, so we don't have video of what happened. They were hearing shrieking from his cell. His roommate, I guess, or something, or the person in the next cell was sent away, or something like that, I guess. And then he hanged himself with a bedsheet. Now, people who are hanging themselves usually don't shriek. Generally, they're choking, and that's, you know, sort of the point. And so it's kind of hard for them to scream. I think he was murdered, yeah. I think that it was almost certainly knocked off. The official story here makes so little sense. We've got look, the government doesn't like to rock the boat. And yet the Attorney General's like, well, something terribly wrong happened here, so we're looking into it too. Now, the FBI raids like Epstein Island right afterwards, and the whole entire case is weird from start to finish.
And then the memes followed. Meanwhile, the world's largest tropical rainforest was set ablaze.
Jarring photos and videos of the flames tearing through the Amazon have caught the world's attention. Scientists using NASA satellites to track the fires say 2019 is shaping up to be the Brazilian Amazon's worst fire since 2010. The main consensus? The fires were caused by human activity. Why are we paying attention to the fires? Hansen believes the smoke traveling south in the atmosphere into Sao Paulo, the commercial hub of Brazil, played a major role.
And on the descent, you saw this really clear aerosol line in the atmosphere, this really clear layer of smoke. and that freaks people out. He just landed in Sao Paulo.
Combine that with social media and celebrities chiming in, and you had the perfect storm. This isn't the first time Brazil has suffered dramatic forest fires. 2015 and 2016 were particularly bad years with the warming of El Niño, when droughts allowed the fires to spread quickly. But whether or not people are paying attention, it raises important questions about deforestation.
On the first day of September, a hurricane made landfall in the Bahamas, bringing death and destruction in its wake.
And we begin with the relentless threat from Hurricane Dorian, rapidly strengthening over the past 24 hours to a monster Category 5 storm, striking the Bahamas with 185-mile-per-hour winds and now heading towards the U.S. mainland. As we come on, take a look. The hurricane is still churning over parts of the Bahamas and just 150 miles from the Florida coast. Dorian slamming ashore in the northern Bahamas, the most powerful storm ever recorded to strike the island nation. The rain and storm surge flooding streets surrounding homes, trapping people inside. The first images of the damage just coming in, power and communications are gone. Tonight, Hurricane Dorian is now heading towards the U.S. mainland, but its impact in the Bahamas is...
2 weeks later, 2 Saudi oil factories were attacked.
Drones have hit 2 Saudi Aramco oil facilities, triggering large explosions. Yemen's Houthi rebels have claimed responsibility. The attacks come just days after the kingdom said the state-owned oil giant's much-anticipated stock listing would happen very soon. Saudi Arabia's Interior Ministry says one attack happened at the Aramco site at Abqaiq in the country's eastern province. The company says the Abqaiq processing plant is the largest crude oil stabilization plant in the world. It's estimated it can process up to 7 million barrels of crude oil a day. The other attack was at Khurais, about 150 kilometers northeast of Riyadh. The fires are said to be contained.
A week later, the America First president sends U.S. troops to defend the American people's freedom, Saudi oil.
We are sending troops and other things to the Middle East to help Saudi Arabia. But are you ready? Saudi Arabia, at my request, has agreed to pay us for everything we're doing.
The additional troops dispatched by the White House will bring the total deployment of US forces to the kingdom to 3,000 since mid-September. The US will also increase the number of Patriot missile systems and provide Riyadh with the THAAD defense system also. Washington says it's all to counter the threat from Iran after last month's attack on Saudi oil refineries.
But during that time, a raid on Area 51 was undertaken.
3, 2, 1, go! 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 You got it! Oh! Oh my God!
Get off the gate!
Oh! Get off the gate, he said! Where's the other 2 million people?
They got dogs! We've got dogs!
What is he doing?
But still, if you cross, then you get fined. That's why we don't cross.
The guy who has permission should take my hand.
It's not just a fine, you're going to jail.
No, I'm saying the guy who has permission to take someone in.
Donald Trump. You get his phone number?
Oh, okay.
Let me know.
Okay.
DT.
Let me into Area 51.
The event would go down in meme history.
Back out here live, we will have much more from the tiny community of Rachel, Nevada at 6:30.
Several days later, the Botox of the House formally introduces articles of impeachment against the same America First president.
The actions taken to date by the president have seriously violated the Constitution, especially when the president says, Article 2 says I can do whatever I want. For the past several months, we have been investigating in our committees and litigating in the courts, so the House can gather all the relevant facts and consider whether to exercise its full Article 1 powers, including a constitutional power of the utmost gravity, approval of articles of impeachment. And this week, the president has admitted to asking the president of Ukraine to take actions which would benefit him politically. The actions of the Trump presidency revealed the dishonorable fact of the president's betrayal of his oath of office, betrayal of our national security, and betrayal of the integrity of our elections. Therefore, today, I'm announcing the House of Representatives moving forward with an official impeachment inquiry. I'm directing our 6 committees to proceed with their investigations under that umbrella.
On October 1st, the People's Republic celebrated its 70th birthday.
没有任何力量能够撼动我们伟大祖国的地位，没有任何力量能够阻挡中国人民和中华民族的前进步伐。前进征程上，我们要坚持和平统一、一国两制的方针，保持香港、澳门长期繁荣稳定，推动海峡两岸关系和平发展，团结全体中华儿女，继续为实现祖国完全统一而奋斗。
Meanwhile, in Iraq, protests were underway.
In cities across the country, young and mostly unemployed Iraqis are directing their anger at officialdom. They blame the government for failing to create jobs. The authorities' heavy-handed response to the protests only increases their resentment.
We are peaceful, but they meet us with bullets and tear gas. The government is fighting us, but we will carry on. We will not retreat.
2 years after the end of the war against the so-called Islamic State terror group, there's little sign of any peace dividend. 1 in 4 young Iraqis are out of work. Basic services like water and electricity are unreliable. Hospitals, roads and schools all lack funding.
Young people have no jobs and no money. The country is taking money from abroad, but it doesn't benefit our own people. We are very tired.
We say those who are corrupt should go. We are protesting for our rights.
A few days later, Turkey's new Ottoman tyrant declared a renewed offensive on anti-Islamist Kurds in Syria.
This evening, the streaks of artillery lit the sky of this border town, the Turkish army hitting Kurdish targets just inside Syria. The strikes began just after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the first targets, Tal Abyad. Until Sunday, it was a Kurdish and US military observation post. Now the Americans have pulled out, allowing the Turks to demonstrate they are now taking control here, despite global calls for them to hold back. Pictures from another Syrian Kurdish town show the impact of the strikes. The Kurds claim there have been civilian casualties. There is no independent confirmation of that yet. Turkish jets have been in the air too. Without leaving Turkish airspace, they can still strike Kurdish targets on the other side. From positions in the Turkish town of Akçakle, we heard booms of artillery as they hit what Turkey says are YPG militia positions, the Kurdish fighters they've long wanted to destroy. But they are the same fighters who have, alongside the Americans and the British, been pivotal in fighting the Islamic State terror group. Turkish President Erdogan was briefed on the operation, and these images are designed to boost his popularity, a commander-in-chief and in charge.
But while many predicted a bloodbath,
we now know, we believe, that
The Turks now intend to go further south than originally expected and to go both west and east, which would increase their zone from beyond a 30-kilometer depth and nearly 440 kilometers wide.
I can think of nothing more disgusting in all the years I've been in Congress than what this president is allowing to happen with the Kurds.
We have pulled the rug out from under them. They're being slaughtered. There are war crimes being committed against them.
For God's sakes, what are they waiting for, right? People are being killed right now. And here you have Secretary Mnuchin saying, oh, well, we'll think about it. Maybe we'll do something. President Trump tweeting that he's going to destroy their economy. They look ridiculous.
In that part of Syria that Turkey wouldn't attack. You hear the president and people like Rand Paul talk about endless wars all the time, and it's kitschy. But actually, we were preventing an endless war, and that actually commenced on Sunday.
Peace prevailed.
The 5-day ceasefire agreement negotiated between the U.S. and Turkey has come to an end. And Turkey and Russia have agreed on a deal over removing the Kurdish fighters from the Turkish-Syria border area. Our Hong Yu reports.
Turkey and Russia agreed on Tuesday to remove the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces that are within 30 kilometers of the Turkish border. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the agreement at a joint news conference after their summit in Sochi on Tuesday local time.
The Syrian flag raised over the city of Manbij. It's meant to signal the Syrian army's presence in the city, a move that follows the agreement between Kurdish forces and the government in Damascus. And Damascus has brought along international allies. Manbij, together with other Kurdish-held areas, was abandoned by US forces, leaving it vulnerable to Turkey's military offensive in northern Syria.
We were afraid of Turkey's aggression, but now the Turkish army won't be able to enter our city. We feel safe now.
My fellow Americans, I greet you this morning from the White House to announce a major breakthrough toward achieving a better future for Syria and for the Middle East. It's been a long time. Over the last 5 days, you have seen that a ceasefire that we established along Syria's border has held, and it's held very well, beyond most expectations. Early this morning, the government of Turkey informed my administration that they would be stopping combat and their offensive in Syria and making the ceasefire permanent, and it will indeed be permanent. However, you would also define the word permanent in that part of the world as somewhat questionable. We all understand that, but I do believe it will be permanent. I've therefore instructed the Secretary of the Treasury to lift all sanctions imposed on October 14th in response to Turkey's original offensive moves against the Kurds in Syria's northeast border region. So the sanctions will be lifted unless something happens that we're not happy with.
But on YouTube, rumors of a new purge weapon surfaced.
It's the end of the world for YouTube. Again. The internet's most volatile platform is facing yet another doomsday in the form of the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, which states that it's illegal to collect personal data on internet users under the age of 13. It's understandable that Google has been caught unawares by this, as this relatively recent law only came into force 19 years ago. YouTubers are a superstitious and cowardly lot, so when something goes wrong on the platform, which it seems to do every week, we get nervous. A lot of creators are worried about whether their content counts as made for kids, and whether they're in danger of a $40,000 fine for inaccurately labeling their content. This, though, isn't the real problem with the legislation. There's a big elephant in the room that nobody at the Financial Trading Commission or YouTube seem willing to discuss. In February of 2019, the video platform TikTok received the largest fine to date, a whopping $5.7 million for failure to comply with COPPA. Then, in September, Google was fined $170 million, a fine that was 30 times larger than TikTok's. It's hard to argue with the decision, as YouTube has absolutely been in violation of the law, and it hasn't even been giving out free pretzels. In the face of this fine, YouTube essentially passed the buck as the FTC announced plans to go after individual creators who don't mark their content as made for kids. This despite the fact that it is YouTube, rather than creators, who collect data on viewers. But herein lies the major problem that the FTC has thus far ignored: the question of enforcement. According to Google, video creators upload 500 hours of content to YouTube every single minute. If you were to watch every second of new content uploaded in a single day, it would take you 80 years. Policing the internet is really, really hard.
Back in Syria, the Caliph of the Islamic State met his end.
But we do begin with some breaking news. Several news sources reporting tonight that the leader of ISIS, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, has been killed in a raid in northwest Syria. The leader of the terror group has been in hiding for the last 5 years. Newsweek reports that President Trump approved a special ops mission targeting al-Baghdadi tonight. You might remember in April, a video was published by ISIS that showed a man who claimed to be Baghdadi. It was the first time he was seen since July of 2014, when he spoke at the Great Mosque.
In November, regime change came to Bolivia.
Lo estoy renunciando justamente para que mis hermanas y hermanos, dirigentes, autoridades del movimiento al socialismo, no sean hostigados, perseguidos, amenazados. Lamento mucho este golpe cívico y algún sector de la población puede emplearse para atentar contra la democracia, contra la paz social, con violencia, con amedrentamiento, intimidar al pueblo boliviano.
Back in Hong Kong, protests prematurely ended the academic year.
We start in Hong Kong, where pro-democracy activists have clashed with police in some of the worst violence since the protests began 5 months ago. This was the scene outside the Chinese university. Students setting up barricades in surrounding streets, at least one car set on fire. Students had thrown rocks at riot police, who responded with volleys of tear gas. We've also heard that a highway nearby has been blocked because of the demonstrations. Earlier, also disruption to train services when a line was reportedly blocked by objects placed upon the tracks. So a lot of disturbance, all focusing around this campus, the Chinese university in Hong Kong.
On the same day, the impeachment proceedings began.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. If you can remember that far back, Democrats formally began impeachment proceedings against President Trump on September 24th of this year. Today, nearly 2 months later, they held their first public hearing. CNN went wall to wall with it all day under strict instructions from their reclusive dwarf king to squeeze every last drop of partisan drama from the proceedings. If you got stuck in an airport and happened to catch some of it, you can testify to how pointless and tiresome the whole thing was. If nothing else, it made you realize that Democrats really have no master plan for impeachment, whatever you may suspect. They clearly haven't thought it through. They're making it up as they go along, as most people in D.C. are. And in the end, impeachment almost certainly will hurt them. The whole premise is just too dumb not to hurt them. But in the meantime, here's the good news. We did solve at least one nagging mystery today: Trump's crime. It's never been clear exactly what Democrats believe is the impeachable offense here. But now we know. It's this.
Wouldn't it actually be wonderful if we could get along with Russia? Wouldn't that be nice? If we get along with Russia, we go out together with others and we knock the hell out of ISIS. Wouldn't that be great?
Also on that same day, the host of a show named after the perpetrators of the Armenian genocide announces his candidacy for the U.S. House of Representatives.
Welcome to the conversation. Joining me now is candidate for California's 25th District Congressional seat, Cenk Uygur.
Welcome, Anna. Thank you.
I'm welcoming you.
That's right.
He's a guest on this show.
All right. So yes, indeed, I do have an announcement. I will be running for Congress in California's 25th district. I'm going to represent those people in a way that they have not seen before. I will not be a standard politician. I will fight for them. I'm gonna fight to get money out of politics, and I'm gonna call it like it is. You know what campaign donations are from big corporations and lobbyists? Bribes. They're bribes when Republicans take them. They're also bribes when Democrats take them. I'm not gonna take any of that, and I'm gonna fight to get you guys higher wages and to get you health care that your family needs. And my district at this point is literally on fire, okay? And we have got to fix all of this, and a standard politician ain't gonna do it, so here I come. So Anna, everybody thinks, oh no, purple district, progressives can't win. No, I'm gonna crush them.
The internet reacted.
At the very end of his show, not the greatest idea, and despite the announcement leaking days before, it was completely unbelievable. Could it be true? Could he actually be Sargoning himself? Please let it be true.
Welcome to the conversation. Joining me now is candidate for California's 25th district congressional seat, Cenk Uygur.
So yes, indeed, I do have an announcement. I will be running for Congress in California's 25th district.
Yes, it is true. It's happening. He's actually doing it. He's actually running. This has the potential to be the funniest shit to happen in politics in the entire history of humanity. Trump might actually talk about Cenk. My country is in a civil war and I'm happy. I needed this so much. Thank you, Cenk. Do it. I love you, Cenk. Do it. You make me so fucking happy. But I love Anna more because she's making me even more happy.
So I handed off editorial control of the show to Anna earlier today. She already made a decision that I was like, okay, what am I gonna do, right?
So I'm gonna go ahead and ask you a question that's probably gonna make you incredibly uncomfortable. You have a past of denying the Armenian genocide.
Meanwhile, in a country in the Pacific Ocean, an independence referendum was held.
This island region to Australia's north could soon become the world's newest nation. Voting is about to get underway on Bougainville for a referendum where people will have two options: a vote for independence from PNG or a vote for more autonomy but not full independence. So why exactly are some Bougainvilleans pushing to become an independent nation? Bougainville is a series of islands technically part of the same island chain that makes up the Pacific nation of Solomon Islands. Culturally, the people of Bougainville have more in common with the people of Solomon Islands than Papua New Guinea. This was one of multiple factors that has over the years driven calls for independence. Another factor is the island's rich resources and the impacts of mining them. Bougainville was once home to the world's largest open-cut copper mine at Panguna, which at the time provided up to 45% of Papua New Guinea's export profits. These resources also played a significant role in the island's civil war that lasted nearly a decade and left thousands of people dead. A peace agreement reached in 2001 laid the ground for this year's referendum, but even if a vote for independence is achieved, don't expect a new country to be created in the immediate future. Any agreement reached between the two parties will then need to be ratified by Papua New Guinea's parliament, and that's where things could get a little tricky.
In December, a bombshell story that should have been Story of the Year was buried under the impeachment charade. In the United Kingdom, general elections were held, and the result was a de facto second referendum on Brexit.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6 from Downing Street, where Boris Johnson has promised to repay the trust of voters after leading the Conservatives to an extraordinary election victory. The party won an 80-seat Commons majority, its biggest since 1987. The Prime Minister said he hoped his victory would bring closure to the Brexit debate and let the healing begin. But it was a very different night for Labour, the party's worst performance since the 1930s. It was a night that saw the electoral map redrawn. With all seats declared, this is the state of the parties. The Conservatives have won 365 seats, Labour 203, the Scottish National Party 48, the Liberal Democrats 11, the DUP 8, and other parties 15. So let's have a look at the map showing the spread of parties at the last election in 2017. And this is how the map looks now, showing the Conservatives have gained 47 seats, Labour have lost 59, the SNP gained 13, and the Liberal Democrats lost 1.
Well, we did it! We did it! We pulled it off, didn't we?
The power of a Prime Minister with authority firmly in his hands.
With this mandate and this majority, we will at last be able to do what? You've been paying attention.
Jubilation here, they can keep the promise to leave the EU next month. The will we, won't we, fundamental tussle of Brexit almost at an end.
This election means that getting Brexit done is now the irrefutable, irresistible, unarguable decision of the British people.
A week later, the President of the free world decided to live up to his moniker of the God Emperor by making Space Marines real.
Going to be a lot of things happening in space, because space is the world's newest warfighting domain. Amid grave threats to our national security, American superiority in space is absolutely vital. And we're leading, but we're not leading by enough, but very shortly we'll be leading by a lot. The Space Force will help us deter aggression and control the ultimate high ground. With today's signing, I will proudly appoint General Jay Raymond, the first Chief of Space Operations, and he will become the very first member of the Space Force, and he will be on the Joint Chiefs. He will be on the Joint Chiefs, which are now expanding by one position. That's a very powerful position. So, General Raymond, congratulations, and thank you for everything you've done.
Towards the end of the month, a possible end for a nearly 2-decade-long war was found.
To Afghanistan now, where Taliban leadership has reportedly agreed to a temporary ceasefire. It's a step that could also pave the way for a peace agreement with the U.S. after months of negotiations. Natasha Fatah is tracking the details. Natasha, what do we know so far?
Well, Jennifer, if these reports are accurate, then possibly a 10-day ceasefire between the Taliban and the Afghan forces would allow a space in order for them, along with the United States, to sign a peace agreement. Now, these are reports coming to us from the Associated Press and the Wall Street Journal with their sources on the ground. CBC News Network has not independently verified these details. But if these reports are to be believed, then the chief negotiator for the Taliban is about to sign off on that peace agreement that has been negotiated for the past several months. You've got the United States pushing for an expulsion, really, of the United States military services there on the ground. They've been working with their Afghan associates, but they're also negotiating with the Taliban. And the key thing that needs to be figured out is, if the U.S. leaves, what does the country look like? What will be the role of the Taliban? And this is difficult to figure out because the rules of engagement are so complicated when you're talking about a noted terrorist organization.
But on the final day of the year, the final day of the decade, a U.S. embassy was besieged in another nearly 2-decade-long Middle Eastern conflict.
On December 31st, hundreds of supporters of an Iranian-backed militia broke into the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad. Video, including some taken by the Post's Mustafa Salim, showed chaos on the ground. Demonstrators were protesting the U.S. airstrikes on December 29th that killed 25 members of the Iranian-backed Kataib Hezbollah militia. The strikes were in retaliation against a rocket attack on a base in northern Iraq that killed a U.S. contractor.
What we're seeing here is supporters of the militia, the Kataib Hezbollah militia. They are marching on the US Embassy in the heavily guarded green zone. They have very high walls, they have a lot of security, iron gates, a lot of guards. It had never been imagined that this embassy could be breached. But
As the sun began to set, militia supporters set up tents for the night outside the compound. Video also showed U.S. helicopters flying in the vicinity of the embassy and launching flares.
Will the wars end? Will the new governments formed this year bring prosperity to the peoples in the decade to come? Who knows? We'll have to find out next year. For the leather-bound tome of 2019 has its final chapter concluded, and therefore, the final chapter to the tome of the 2000 teens has had its final words written. There was a treasure of events. Many happenings transpired. Governments collapsed. Means were forged. The good and the bad endured. Many had fallen, but many more had risen. And none shall deny. 2019 was a magical year of multitudinous phenomenon that will be rewarded their own space in our shared history. We salute 2019 and look forward to an equally, if not more eventful, decades beginning in 2020. Goodbye 2019. Goodbye the 2000 teens. And happy new decade and happy new year 2020 to everyone. Oh yeah, and PewDiePie got married.
Every day that since I met Marcia has been the best days of my life. Marcia has taught me to always go for what you want without any hesitation, and that has opened my life to so many new experiences that I never would even dream to be possible. But most importantly, Marcia brings out the best in me, and I feel so fortunate to be spending the rest of my life with this amazing woman.